In section 22, Alfred Tennyson is remembering the story of his friendship with Arthur Hallam. They were friends for 4 years. He mentions that. And then, as the fifth autumn was approaching, coming around, that's when the tragedy struck. Here he personifies hope and death. Death he refers to as the shadow feared of man. And at the end, he describes his own fear of his own mortality. He says, "I think that somewhere in the waste the shadow sits and waits for me." So he feels that his own death might be soon. I imagine this is quite common when you lose a person who is close to you, that you loved, that you feel your own panic, and whether it's lost to death or lost to any other thing, that you lose contact with them suddenly, abruptly, painfully, that it's hard to feel safe for a while. I think he was feeling some of those feelings. And as I read this section, I also think about the way that we tell our story, the way that we retell our own stories is important. We are humans, are storytelling creatures. We're always creating stories. Sometimes we have to fill in the gaps sometimes we make assumptions in order to fill in the gaps and tell a story. And sometimes our stories that we tell ourselves are not especially, they're not especially reflective of the truth, but they're reflective of something that we need to believe in ourselves. If you can picture a person who is always rewriting the story of their life to place them as the victim, they're always putting blame on someone else, and there's something inside them that needs to view themselves, and they need someone to acknowledge that they're a victim, and so they keep creating these stories of how they're a victim. That's an example of a time when our stories don't necessarily reflect what really happened out there, but they're our psychological response that has as much to do with our emotions and our needs as it does with reality out there. So think about the stories that you tell yourself about your life. What role do you play in these stories? And it's also, to me, it's also a marker of healing when you're able to tell stories that are more true, when you're able to recognize stories that are more true and less about creating an image for yourself to look at. What kind of stories do you tell yourself? How do those stories change over time? An example might be when a teenager does something that they know that they're going to get in trouble for, and the parent confronts them, and they are going to lie. They're going to say whatever they need to say to protect themselves. Years later, they might be able to, when they feel safe, they might be able to acknowledge that, yeah, that wasn't true. I actually did the thing that that I lied about earlier. So when we're in different circumstances and different places, we're better able to acknowledge the truth. So, anyway, this is a story that Tennyson is telling himself about his relationship with he and Arthur Hallam. This is where he's at right now. The path by which we twain did go, twain meaning two, which led by tracks that pleased us well, through 4 sweet years arose and fell, from flower to flower, from snow to snow. And we with singing cheered the way, and crowned with all the season lent, from April on to April went, and glad at heart from May to May. But where the path we walked began to slant the 5th autumnal slope, as we descended following hope, there sat the shadow feared of man, who broke our fair companionship and spread his mantle dark and cold, and wrapped thee formless in the fold, and dulled the murmur on thy lip, and bore thee where I could not see, nor follow, though I walk in haste, and think that somewhere in the waste the shadow sits and waits for me.